They call it the black bow. It rises like a bruise across the sky, an impossible arc of velvet dark that swallows sunlight and leaves everything beneath it a little flatter, like a photograph whose color has leaked away. When I first saw that shape, leaning over the train line as if it had been hung there to measure the town, I thought it was a trick of the light, or the way the clouds gathered above the chimneys. I thought other, kinder things. I did not know then that the arch had rules, that it kept a calendar, that it marked the moment when people were told to disappear. People in Greyrop learned to live by a timetable of fear. 20 years, 7 days, hide, wait, return. I moved to Greyrop in 2015 because the job paid better than anything within 100 miles, and because my life had begun to feel like a series of wrong doors. The office itself was a tidy, cheerful place, floors of pale wood and a bright cafeteria where sandwiches never seemed to go stale, and the coffee was hard to argue with. The work was banal in the way that keeps a man busy and quiet. Spreadsheets for distribution, a neat grind of numbers that mostly involved moving things from one ledger to another. My colleagues had names that were easy to remember. Peter, who had the laugh that sawed through the room. Lily, who kept her hair pulled tight and her emails tighter. Harry, big hands and a temper folded into sarcasm. Graham, the floor manager, who wore suits the way some people wear armor. There were other names I picked up slowly. Sarah, Robert, Carla, faces that would recede and reemerge over the months like islands. It looked like any other small-town job at first. What made Greyrop different was less what it offered and more the way it refused to speak about itself. There were too many good things without an explanation. Houses with solar panels that pay back in months, a grocery that always had the rarest produce, neighbors who spoke in a kind of effortless courtesy that rarely touched the eyes. People owned things and showed no strain from owning them. They owned their silence too. Outsiders were tolerated in the manner of a tolerated weatherfront. They were allowed in but asked not to settle in the places where the town kept its secrets. Charlie was the man who taught me how to navigate that silence without embarrassing myself. He introduced himself on my second day, leaning against the photocopier like he belonged to the machine, eyes slanted as if amused. He was local. In those first weeks I learned what that meant, born and bred and married to the town in a way I was not. Harriet, his wife, worked 2 streets over at a bakery that smelled of sugar and oven heat. Charlie had the kind of easy modesty that made you want to like him until he said a thing that froze like a weed in ice. "You'll learn the rules," he said. "Better that you do before you're asked to keep them." I laughed because the normal thing is to laugh at warnings that come with no punchline.
He gave me a look that suggested he'd said this before and meant it differently each time. "Rules like don't park on Mill Lane in the spring?" I asked. "Not quite." He slid a paper cup across the break room and offered me the coffee as if we were complicit in a small theft. "You'll get used to it. People whisper in church and on the market day and never on the bus. It's how towns stay nice." That was the first time anyone had spoken of the town like it had a spine beneath the prettiness. We became friends in the way men do when hours overlap. Shared cigarettes outside the building, slow drinks at the bar, an old playlist on repeat. Charlie would knock back stories about the town as easily as he drank. Half laugh and half warning, tales of eccentric uncles that left money in wills, of festivals that invited the whole county, of the time the river flagged and they found the old mill where it shouldn't have been. He never mentioned the black bow directly in those early months, but he kept its shadow in the edges of dinner conversation, like a mention of bad weather. And yet the town's generosity made it hard to be suspicious. Food arrived in kind, and favors were returned with smiles. There were invitations to pub quizzes and to summers where nothing cost too much. My apartment, an upstairs flat above a florist, had a view over the lane to a churchyard where the gravestones leaned politely, like they were trying not to stare. The list of small, tidy comforts built up until you began to believe the lie that nothing was owed for such ease. Paradise, I would discover, likes tidy bookkeeping. The ledger is kept. The payment is simply arranged to arrive later, in mass. The first time Charlie told me the story properly, he did it at 3 in the morning, when the town seemed smaller and the windows held the streetlight in a smear of yellow. We were at his flat, cubs cooling on the sink, the television paused on something stupid and domestic. Outside, a dog barked like an old knuckle being rubbed raw. "It happens every 20 years, he said, as if quoting nursery rhyme. "Like clockwork. The sky folds in, black as coal, like someone has taken a sheet and hung it in the air. They call it the black bow. Sometimes they say black rainbow for the tourists, you know, because it sounds less like a funeral." I remember being from somewhere that talked about weather without metaphors. And what every 20 years there's a storm? It's not a storm, Charlie said. He watched me the way men watch someone who doesn't yet understand the consequence of words. Storms are wet and leave you with flooded basements. This tastes like something that belonged to the sky. If you drink it, if you put it to your lips because you're thirsty or because you think it is rain, you change. The body changes. People get hungry for different things. They stop recognizing what used to be people. And it's not just about hunger. It's about the way we see each other after.
They become... He shrugged, and I had the sense that he was summing up a cathedral in the motion of his hands and deciding not to go Protestant about the details. How do you survive it? I asked, because the world needs logistics even when logic fails it. Hide, he said simply. We leave, we go to houses that belong to kin who live out on the moor, and we stay away for 7 days. We don't drink anything that we don't own and seal the taps. We wait. After 7 days, the bow goes, the black goes back up to the sky, and the sun comes back out like an apology. We come back. We sweep the sidewalks. We smile as if nothing has happened. Why 7 days? Why 20 years? We don't ask the sky for its arithmetic, he said. We just obey it. The 20 years keeps the town from wearing the mark too often, and the 7 days keeps us from tasting it. The rest is... contingency. He smiled then, and it was the same smile he wore to hide shame or fear. It was a folk tale of the kind that earns its keep by being told just loud enough. Charlie supplied fringe details as if that made him less guilty for the knowledge. Mr. Hall had lost his leg in 63 when a man didn't learn the rules. Betty kept her curtains closed for 3 months in 83, and no one asked why. Ronnie, the old carpenter who died quietly in his sleep, had stayed during an event in 03 and came back different. He lived for 2 more years eating things that made people close their eyes. Did you ever see anyone change? I asked. Once, Charlie said. When I was small. I was about 9. We were playing near the quarry because that's what boys do, throw things and shout. The black bow came that year, sliding over like a curtain. We learned to go upstairs. We learned to seal the water in the sink. But my cousin, who was 7, ran out because he thought the rain would taste like candy. He put his mouth out. He drank. Within an hour, he was... He stopped, reaching for a word. Different, I offered. Difference kind, Charlie said. He looked like my cousin, and he moved like my cousin, but the look in his eyes was new, as if a window had opened into a room with only one light bulb. The things he wanted weren't toys. He bit at meat he couldn't swallow. He pressed his face to the window and watched us like an animal trying to learn poems. He sang sometimes, low and wrong. He couldn't hold still for breath. We had to... the things you do to keep a town nice. His voice lowered into that place where memory becomes the only company. We had rules then, too. His childhood memory, 2003, rests in my mind like a bruise. He told it with the flat cadence of someone who had rehearsed grief into a script. He remembered the smell first, a sweetness that didn't belong to the world, like old honey gone heavy. The rain was thick, not like water at all, but like a syrup that clung to the skin and darkened everything it touched.
His cousin's lips turned a shade darker than they should, and they quit being just lips. Charlie's father hid the boy beneath blankets. His mother kept the windows shut. They told the neighbors to leave the street and not to ask why. They moved furniture against doors, bartered canned goods for silence. Did he survive? I asked, because there is a glaring human impulse to test the edges of horror with immediate arithmetic. 1 life in, 1 life out. He left, Charlie said. He rolled the word like a coin between fingers. He left the town in the night. We said that he had gone to his aunt's, to the city. No one would say the truth. People's mouths seal when the bow crosses the sky. They do it to protect the town. His story sat between us like a patient. We drank the coffee, which tasted of grounds and habit, and I felt the chill of being admitted to a club whose initiation I had not chosen. Charlie had given me a key to something I could not close again. For a long time, I let the idea become a rumor I could tuck away. The human mind is good at making partitions. It folds the unsavory things into boxes and labels them not now. Greyrop's perks made the partitioning easy. The supermarket's produce manager, who I later learned was Mr. Hall's niece, would send me a bag of pears now and then. Harriet would slip a lemon tart to my desk if she saw me stuck at the late shift. On payday, you could walk down the lane and see the town in its untroubled glory. Children playing, couples walking dogs, the church bells marking time as if their job in the world was exactly what it said it was. It wasn't until the town calendar reminded itself, until 2023 rolled around, that the neatness of those days felt like a lie being held together with tape. December clipped the year hard. The air in Greyrop had the lean, brittle quality of the month. I remember the cold in my hands that morning and the way the bus shook on the curve outside the office. The forecast had promised drizzle, something polite that apologized in advance. No one mentioned the 20-year mark in the elevator, though I wondered if they felt it as a kind of pressure anyway. The town keeps its knowledge like a jar of glass marbles. You can shake them, hear them, but you don't touch. At work that day, the lights shuddered as if someone had rearranged the sky. We joked about the power for a minute. Graham muttered something about the old wiring. Someone else blamed the heating. And then the world went a shade colder. The windows pooled light. The panes lost their edge. I walked to the break room and noticed Charlie's hands on his mug, knuckles white, as if he were holding heat and not truth. Outside, something tangled the horizon. At first, you could mistake it for cloud. The line stretched across the town like a ribbon tied too tightly around a present.
It was wrong, not because it existed, but because it had a texture to it I had never seen in cloud before, like a velvet ribbon. Yes, but not only that, it hummed with a low, almost tactile sound. If you pressed your forehead to the glass, you could feel it in your teeth. "People keep their taps capped," Charlie said quietly, as if reciting a truism. "They won't use the town water. They drink what they've stockpiled. They don't leave the doors. They give the pets to neighbors who won't keep them, or they trust each other in strange ways." "How many years since the last one?" I asked, remembering our arithmetic. 20, he said. "We keep it in our heads. 2003 was the last of the ones I remember. Before that, 83. Before that, 63. The rhythm is why the town looks the way it does. Think about it. The houses with new roofs, the banks of solar. People plan on not being here sometimes. They plan on leaving." The first drop didn't look like a raindrop. It fell slow, like a coin released from a hand, and darkened the sill. It left a smear the color of burnt sugar, and a smell that was more suggestion than scent. It smelled of everything in memory, old coal and honey and something like a child's lost toy. People in the office looked up as if someone had turned the volume down on the whole world. "Stay inside," Graham called, his voice even but small, the man trying to administer order to something that doesn't accept management. We moved like that, easy, neat responses to an inexplicable tide. We started closing doors, sealing gaps, doing the things our culture taught us to do in the face of inconvenience. The props were familiar. Duct tape over the sink, tea towels pressed to door cracks. It felt domestic, and domestic things are comforting until you see teeth where kitchenware ought to be. No one thought to call anyone else. You don't call in Greyrop. You arrange your survival with the neighbors who will hand you bread and not ask questions later. We turned off the communal water near the kitchen and took from the bottles under the cabinet. We counted plastic jugs into the middle of the table like currency. Peter was the one who laughed when the first few large drops fell and landed on the pavement outside. He'd gone to smoke a cigarette on his break and stood under the awning like a man expecting trivial inclement weather. From where I watched, he lifted his head and let the dark rain paint a stripe down his cheek. It hung there, heavy, refusing to run. "Hey," he said, as if he were striking a match for conversation. "It tastes like metal." He said the last word as a joke. There was the clank of bravado in it that's common to men who still want to be admired. "You shouldn't," Lily said, but she sounded like someone reading a line from a script she didn't believe in. Her knuckles were white on the mug. He laughed, a wide, careless sound. "How do you know if you don't try it?" He shouldn't have done it. None of us should have watched. He tilted his head back and let a rivulet cross his lower lip. For a second, nothing happened. The moment stretched. His jaw relaxed in a way that made his face young. He moaned, and at first it sounded like a pleased animal, a man appreciating flavor. His hand went to his throat, but not to choke, an exploratory gesture, the way someone might test a new melody on their tongue. Then he changed. The room went quiet in the very way a cup can go quiet when it drops. Peter's eyes rolled in a way no drunk in the place had ever done. He swallowed again, like someone trying to keep a secret down, and the sound he made was not his laugh. It's hard to say it with the voice still lodged in my bones. It was a small, wet rearrangement of breath and muscle that made the talkative bravado of the man recede like an actor leaving stage right. "Peter," Lily said, her voice thin. He moved toward the door like a thing that knows where it wants to go, but not how to meet the world there. He was taller all of a sudden, or perhaps it was only that his shoulders widened with intent. There was an animal light in his eyes, not the feral panic people imagine in monsters, but a patient hunger that was patient like a tide. Graham stepped forward and tried to put his arm on Peter's chest. It was a reflexive human reach for calming, an attempt to reclaim what was being lost. Peter's hand closed on Graham's wrist like a vice. The sound of the bones not breaking but rearranging. It's the sound you never want to hear. It's the thud and the twig in the dark. Peter's face split into a smile that had no humor. It was the wrong kind of openness, the kind that shows teeth where we expect a joke. "Get back," Harry said. Harry was always surprising in a crisis, either too big for it or too small. That day he was small. He had a pack of chewing gum in his mouth that he chewed with the sudden panic of a man trying to keep his jaw busy. Peter's motion was quick then, a blur of movement that denied the shape of his body for a second. He lurched out the door with no clear goal beyond reaching the street, and for a brief flash you could see that the rain had dribbled down his lips and caught in the folds of his collar, black like oil in the crease. We chased after him because what else do you do when someone you know begins to unmake himself in front of the coffee machine? We banged on the break room door and the front door and heard the rain fall like small defeated drums. Outside, the street was a dark map. The world under the bow was quieter, as if the sky were holding its breath to watch what we did. Peter was on the sidewalk, hands balled, and when he turned toward us, his mouth moved in a way that made the sound come jagged, like a record skipping across a groove. He took a step and collapsed, not into the posture of an exhausted man, but into the crookedness of one who had been taught his limbs belonged to a different story.
"Don't," Lily started, and the words slipped like a wet thing. I was the one who thought, absurdly, of the story Charlie had told me. The open window in the room with one light bulb, the child with something softened and other. For a heartbeat the story crystallized and became not folklore, but an instruction manual for the present. Do not let him drink anything else. Seal the taps. Hide. Wait 7 days. We didn't have the spare measure of grace that folklore asks of people when the myth comes home. We had panic. We did what any frightened group does. We made a decision to contain rather than to understand. We leapt and closed doors and threw ourselves into the ritual that had been taught, the only one that saves the town from unwrapping itself into something else. But I am getting ahead of where the mind can follow without panic. There is a particular cruelty to the way the first thing happens. It is small, intimate, and domestic by contrast. Someone drinks, tastes, and stops being who they were. Later, when I try to recall the details of Peter's change without a tremor in my chest, I find only fragments. The way his fingers twitched like roots, the way his lips looked too full, the sudden animal focus on movement. There was no explosion of gore. Monsters in Greyrop are not dramatic. They are intimate betrayals, a lover's face at the wrong moment. That is what makes them worse. They are not the boogeyman under the bed. They are the neighbor who answered your email. We got him back inside with more force than tenderness. Graham slammed the door and braced himself with his shoulder, like the man in charge of the floor that day. He believed in the order his suit and posture promised. We taped the seams of the windows with hands that shook, because the tape seemed both trivial and heroic. Bottles of water were passed like sacrament. We checked each other's lips for dark stains. No one used sinks without drying the mouths that used them first. Old habits, old rituals. We became a small, frightened church. Charlie stood at the window for a long time, as if the act of watching would make him less guilty for not having told me sooner. He said nothing. His face was a map of old debts. Finally, he turned to me, and his mouth worked, the kind of slow working you do when moving a heavy thing. "We were told to hide for a reason," he said. "Not just to preserve life, to preserve the cleanliness of things. People think hiding is cowardice. Sometimes it is. Sometimes hiding is the difference between the town staying pretty and the town being eaten." His voice cracked like something brittle. I remember thinking, with the self-inflicted cruelty of the human brain, that any of us who had accepted the town's gifts without asking where they came from
had been complicit in the arrangement. The pears on my kitchen table tasted of that complicity. The salary in my bank account had been grease for the wheels of silence.
When the drop hit the sill again, it sang a small, terrible song. It was slow enough that you almost thought you could stop it if you moved fast enough. But the rules are not democratic. They don't care about speed. They care about contact and choice. We told ourselves, he only licked it. We told ourselves, it would have been worse if he'd drunk more. We told ourselves lies that sounded tidy. I should have left that night. I should have taken my things and walked out into whatever storm there was beyond the town line and never looked back. Instead, I sat on the floor and watched Peter sleep in a way that was no longer sleep. He made noises like someone breathing through a mouthful of paper. Lily covered his face with a blanket because it made her feel less exposed. Harry stared at the ceiling like a man calculating his sins. That night, Charlie told me again about the year he had been a boy and seen his cousin change. He told me about the way the town sealed itself and how elders counted jars and names and kept a ledger of who would come back and who would not. The ledger, he said, was not always blood. Some payments were quiet. An old man who never aged past his 50s, a new square of public park, a school modernized in a way no grant could justify. Paradise, he said, is a business. It takes a tariff. Why does the town accept it? I asked, when my voice could find the shape of the word. Why keep the gifts? Because it's easier, Charlie said. Because people like the town nicer than they like the truth. Because even when a neighbor turns, it is still your neighbor. You hide. You leave for 7 days and hope they don't come to your door. You come back and pretend none of it happened. You smile at the child in the street, because the child does not yet know the accounts are being settled. We spoke like that until dawn, making bargains in the dark. I promised things to keep myself from running. I apologized to Peter in my head for not moving faster, though there was nothing I could have done that wouldn't have made the problem worse. The rules were old and iron. They did not bend because of a man who finally had a mortgage and a new set of towels. The next morning, the sky was a wound. The black bow stretched like a mouth, and the town moved through the rituals of its survival. People shuttered their houses. Neighbors walked with boxes and cars packed for a temporary exile. I saw faces in the street that had not belonged to me for long. Elders carrying suitcases with practiced movements. Parents dragging car seats as if the future were something they could protect. There was a collective professional hush, as if the entire place had rehearsed this. The calendar of fear was keeping time again. Graham issued orders like a man reading from a manual. He set up a rotating watch and assigned someone to the door with instructions not to open unless absolutely necessary.
We counted water bottles and sealed the taps in the bathrooms with tape and a superstition that felt like discipline. Charlie moved with a business-like sorrow, his fingers careful with the things he handled. But why hide? I asked him. Because the title of our culture's restriction had to be more than survival. It had to be a reason to teach tea towels and broken panes, and to insist that strangers not be trusted with your history. Because the town will survive if we do, he said, and because the town will vanish if we don't. Because the people who change are not always unrecognizable at first. They learn to look like us and then forget entirely. They will eat what they can reach. They will taste the town's best and decide it's their last supper. They do not stop at property. They take the people that make the place lovable. We hide to keep the price of living small enough to bear. He spoke the words with an exhaustion that felt like a confession. The arithmetic of it was not pleasant, but it was clean. Take a little now, keep the majority. It made monsters of ethics and of men. We closed ourselves into the office because it was strong, a rectangle of glass and metal that seemed at the time like a fortress. We moved desks against doors and centered the jugs of water like relics. We lit candles when the power went, though the office was not the place to have a fire. We ate sandwiches that no one had made and kept the wrappers in a pile. Night came and the rain sounded like a house coughing. The black drops fell in patterns, hitting the pavement and leaving dark stains like fingerprints. They beaded on glass like pearls that refused to shine. We slept in shifts and dreamed of small, ordinary things, the taste of an honest apple, the sight of the sun on a field, and woke to the sound of something in the air that had an intent to it. By the third day, small anomalies began to appear. Someone in the adjacent office, Ronnie, who had taken refuge at the library, sent a note used by our tiny network, "Do not open the doors." Someone else reported lights that flickered inside homes without movement.
There were rumors of the old man in Elm Street who had been seen wandering and talking to lampposts. We didn't check them. The town had agreed not to cross the border of its own fear. Collectively, we were both brave and cowardly. We had chosen complicity as a survival strategy. When the first of the transformed returned to the doors of houses and pressed their faces to glass, the town learned to look away. They turned their heads like people at a funeral. We had learned a social contract made of silence and small domestic acts of denial. We wanted, above all, to preserve the illusion. The neat lawns, the well-stocked supermarket, the youthful face of the square. We would wipe away stains and repaint fences rather than admit the cost.
On the fourth day, I stood in the break room and watched a line of black droplets hang on the rim of the parking bollard outside. They were profound in their smallness, each one a separate promise of change. The world under the bow had its own laws now, a separate jurisdiction. It was easy to see how people might trade humanity for quiet streets and green parks that looked new. "You should leave, Michael," Charlie said at one point, the words coming not like a plea, but like a map. "If you can. Go now. Take your life with you." "Go where?" I asked. There was nowhere convenient that hedged against a sky that kept a calendar. "My rent's due. My life." "Your life is not worth those pears," he said. He spoke with a sharpness that told me I had offended with the same unthinking appetite that had put a man outside with his mouth to the rain. "If you leave, you may never want this place again. If you stay, you might have to do what we do. We are the ones who pay." I told him then, with the idiotic honesty of a man who still hoped for some moral calculus, that I had not been willing to be the person who runs away from difficulty. My words were small, the kind that sound noble until the sky takes the test. Charlie's face softened, and he put a hand on my shoulder with the steadiness of someone who has given both comfort and judgment. "You never get asked the right question when the black bow comes," he said. "You get asked the smaller one, will you survive? The bigger one is, what will you be when you survive?" That question followed me down to the basement, and to the boxes of bottled water, and into the small private places where we hide our consciences. Outside, the rain was patient. It did not scream. It tasted like the world has forgotten the rule about sweetness being safe. When the first of us began to change, Peter at the pavement, a laugh turned into a snarl, a look that was suddenly not his. Something in the fabric of the town frayed, and then knitted up in a different way. The neatness remained, but it had the stain of knowing sewn into it. People kept their smiles because they had been taught to protect the town's face. I was there when it began, and I will be here when it goes, because the town has chosen me as witness, or perhaps I chose myself. I tell you this now because people outside these streets read headlines and think weather is a thing that happens to everyone the same way. They call it rain and walk on. They don't know the black bow, because it does not visit their skies. It learned to be discreet. It visits only the towns that will pay. If this is the kind of story you come to these long narrations for, slow circles of dread and the slow confession of complicity, then subscribe and keep your seat. There are more small things to tell, like how we learned to ration, and how we kept watch, and how some people stopped being people in ways I cannot speak of without hearing my own voice break.
There is, beyond the stoop and ferocity of that first night, a form of betrayal that was not spectacular. It was domestic. It was private. It was, terrifyingly, our choice. The rain thickened on the fifth morning. We had run out of the sugary tea and were living on biscuits and tinned fruit. The office smelled of canned citrus and the cold breath of the building. We kept the taps off and the blinds down. The devices had little charge. The radios a few towns over murmured nothing. In the sealed quiet, we counted our options and found them thin as paper. Peter was an argument none of us could win. He was both the proof and the parable. When the first change made its way through him, he brought with it a different sense of the town's arithmetic. If a person could be unliked and then become an appetite, then nothing in the town's cleanliness was absolute. We had to decide whom we were willing to become in order to keep the rest. A noise came from the men's bathroom on the second floor, a small, impossible sound, like a throat clearing under a pillow. Lily followed it, because she is the kind of person who pays attention to the small noises, the ones that insist on being noticed. She came back white as paper with a small bottle in her hand. It was a water bottle, half empty, the water inside a shade darker than the plastic.
"It tastes like sugar," she said, and the words were the same as the ones Peter had used in Swagger. She had licked the rim to check. "No," Charlie said, flat and full of the doom of the man who knows too much. "You don't, if you even think." But the thought had been planted like seed inside her mouth. The rules for monsters work like a slow song. There is always the first note, and then the echo. Lily did not drink from the bottle because she was careless. She drank because she had eaten the town's sweet fruit of comfort, and it had made the rest of the world look dull. I slammed the bottle into the sink with a force that made the fluorescent lights flicker. The water did not spill. The bottle had a small, glutinous slick on the lip, as if something had been there and decided it was what it liked. We put the bottle in a box and resolved to keep it away. Then, in an act that would become one of the 1,000 little moral thorns I carry now, someone else sneaked that bottle open when the house fell quiet. The office had the smell of canned citrus and fear. It had the buzz of a place that thought itself fortified. We were wrong about being safe. I don't mean to make a list of sins here. I want to make clear instead the grotesque alchemy that takes place. Comfort mixed with ignorance yields a slow erosion of the self. People do not become monsters in the style of a fevered actor. They transform in ways that are domestic and intimate, like a wardrobe change on the kitchen floor. They do it because the world has taught them to choose their pleasures and look away from the tab.
When Peter's shape went wrong, when his laughter became a calculation, the room felt smaller, tighter, as if the walls had decided to lean in and listen. We were trained in a way by long habit and quiet rituals, to hide. It is not merely for the practical reason. There is a moral reasoning shoved into the seam as well. If we hide, the town survives. If we do not, the place that feeds us will be unmade. We told ourselves that living in a town like Greyrop was worth small atrocities. The truth is more unsightly. Living there made us choose between what we cherished and the souls of strangers. By the edge of the bow, the rules become a covenant. You hide yourself and your neighbors, you barter what you can, and you keep the secret like a family keeps a will. There is pride in that secrecy. There is a deep and private shame too, which is why you will see people in Greyrop who are polite and who will not look you in the eye. They know what the town does to survive. They also know the cost. As the rain thickened and Peter's movement became more stubborn and less human, we took him back and stowed him on an emergency couch. He breathed like a man pretending to be a machine. We wrapped towels around his head because it made us feel that we were doing something. Outside, under the black bough, the world sounded like a thing being unstitched. I could end this section with a tidy moral about what we learned, but the truth is we learned nothing so tidy at the time. We were raw and confused, and did what people do when the unthinkable arrives. We hid in the hole we've been taught to make. The office became our ark. We barricaded the doors and looked at one another with expressions that belonged to people choosing between cowardice and small moments of courage. On the 8th night of my recollection, on the 5th day under the black bough, I stood by the window and watched a black drop gather on the lip of the gutter like a bead of ink calling gravity's bluff. It held there, full of potential. I understood then, with a clarity that has been both anchor and noose, why we were always told to hide. Not only because the rain could change what you are, not only because a bite of sky could unmake a man, but because when the world offers a perfection that spares you from scarcity, it quietly sets the price and expects you to keep the receipt hidden. You hide, literally, to live another day. You hide figuratively, to ensure that the ledger stays closed and the town remains pleasant for the rest of the year. We did not yet know how far the infection would run through our office. We did not know which of the faces we loved would become impossible. We did not know if the town would forgive us our small failures. We only knew the bow had come and that we had been taught the steps. The first drop had fallen. The rules, old and unforgiving, were moving into place.
And then, just as the streetlights flickered and a car alarm wailed, then went silent, Peter opened his eyes. They were not empty. They were an invitation. He didn't smile like he used to. When Peter opened his eyes, the grin was a hinge, a door that no longer led back to him. For a second, it felt like seeing someone you loved in a foreign country. Same face, wrong language. He looked at us slow and measured, as if deciding which of us should be loved first. Then he laughed, and the sound was an animal testing a trap. Lily screamed the kind of scream that breaks glass because it has nowhere to go. People moved like they always do in crisis, too fast, then too slow. Graham shoved a chair but missed and nearly fell himself. Harry lunged and slipped on the stretch of black that had stuck to the mat by the door. For a moment the office was only hands and sound and the rubber smell of fear. Peter's hand closed on his own throat as if he were tasting something there, then reached again, eager and clumsy. He wasn't obeying reason. He was following a hunger with the single-mindedness of someone who had read the menu and decided never to be undecided again. He scraped fingers along the carpet like a man trying to remember where he dropped a thought. We pushed him down to the couch with more force than affection. He didn't fight back, as much as ignore the idea of resistance. His eyes kept flicking to the window, where the rain hung like wet coal, as if the sky itself were a page he wished to read again. "Lock the doors," Graham ordered. There was a neat, managerial quality to his voice that made it feel like someone reading from corporate procedure. It steadied some of us. It made us feel that simple things, locks, tape, shared protocols, could still hold back what had happened to our friend. We set the watch roster and taped the seams of the windows with hands that trembled. Someone dug out a camping stove and tried to boil water, because in those moments, human beings reach for rituals that feel like medicine. We rationed cups of coffee like an offering. We began the slow inventory: bottled water, tin cans, spare batteries, a broken radio with one warm, dead band. Outside, the sky was the color of an old bruise. The rain came thicker now, each drop a small weight that left the world looking lacquered and absurd. The noise was muffled and intimate, as if the sky had put a hand over the town's mouth. From the window, we could see that the street glistened with the black. It pooled in the gutters and formed bead-like menhirs on the hoods of cars. You could watch it congeal into little islands, and it would sit there like proof the world had narrowed. We did what the town taught us. Don't drink the town water. Drink only what you own. Leave if you can. But for most of us, there was no leaving. I had a lease in the B-check. Lily had a child she could not uproot in a day. Harry had a temper that made him think running would be cowardice.
We had here, in our hands, the small stuff of survival and the shame of having accepted too much without asking the price. It should be said plainly, the infection moves like a courtesy. It asks politely. It invites. It can taste like sugar. We had a theory then about the mechanics, the ugly chance that the rain would taint anything exposed: puddles, open bottles, the lip of a water cooler left unsealed. We had the luxury of superstition to guide our actions, and superstition often does better than statistics in old towns. We sealed taps with tape, we rinsed lips with bottled water, we refused to let anyone near the kitchen sink unless they had washed with what they had brought. We checked mouths like customs officers checking passports. It wasn't enough. On the second night under the bough, when the office quieted and only the rain spoke in the pauses, a sound came from the men's bathroom up the hall, a wet little whisper of a throat clearing. Lily went because she always tended to small noises. She came back pale, holding a small plastic bottle. She had tipped it to her lips, she said, to test if the cap had been left loose. She said it aloud like a confession. The words were so ordinary that for a moment I wanted to applaud the normalcy. "It tasted like sugar," she said. Her fingers kept fiddling with the cap like a nervous priest. Charlie didn't need to turn toward her to know. He already knew. There was that look men have when they are carrying the weight of things they cannot change. His mouth became a line. "Did anyone else touch it?" he asked, and his voice was bare now, without the gentle theater he used to hide behind. "No," Lily whispered. "Just me, I swear." We put the bottle aside in a box labeled hazard, as if a label could make a thing smaller. We put it away with gloves and a sense of ceremony, and our hands shakes. That night, someone else took it. One of the younger temps, Robert, had been laughing earlier at jokes he no longer seemed to find funny. Maybe he'd wanted solace, or maybe curiosity got its teeth in him. We didn't see him do it. We found the empty bottle rolled into the corner like an accusation. He wasn't transformed all at once. The change begins domestic, small unhingings, a tilt of the head, a focus on shadows, a mood of appetite that isn't content with sandwiches. He tried to open the back door, he said aloud. Then he said nonsense about fresh water. Sarah went to stop him, and he laughed and knocked her aside. It ended in a way that made the office feel like it had been rearranged by someone with mean taste. Sarah's wrist was bruised, and Robert sat on the sink, breathing wrong. We learned the value of speed then. A transformation turns tender to something else in quiet increments, and the first impulse is always to help. Help is the contagion's weapon. People come forward. People hand over the straw. They think themselves humane and get handed humiliation in return. We had to become beasts in their own defense. We slept in shifts. We moved like people who had learned to minimize noise. At night, the sounds that came to the glass were low and persistent. The scraping of what might be fingers, the whisper of someone walking the line of windows and testing frames. Once we saw a figure press its face to the glass and watch us with a patience so wrong it felt like theology. There was no splinter interruption of startling panic. There was only the calm of a mind that had learned a new language of hunger. The moral ruptures cut deeper than the physical ones. Harry accused Charlie of knowing more than he had said. He did it in a way that tried to appear like a cry for justice, but came out as a demand for scapegoats. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded more than once. His eyes would flare and he would say it like a mantra. "You knew. You told him. You let me?" "Don't," Charlie would answer, voice a brittle thing. "I told you the rules. I told everyone. No one listened until the drops fell." "That's not the same," Harry pointed, like a man naming the guilty. "You kept part of it. You kept the ledger. Who else did you choose?" The accusation lodged like a splinter. The office is a small stage for big moralities. When a town is used to keeping secrets, blame is the way locals try to make it someone else's sin. Harry's anger didn't make sense at first. What use was anger when the bow hung in the sky? But it made sense later. When humans are starving for reasons beyond bread, they try to find a cause rather than a solution. Charlie did tell us more later that night. He told us about how the town used to do the ledger in a way that made the arithmetic of survival less personal. Donations here, favors there, the quiet rearranging of who goes where. He told us about parties in which people swapped rooms and concerns as if trading baseball cards. He told us how once, long ago, a neighbor thought himself above the rules and stayed. He returned different, and they hid him because they were ashamed. He said the town keeps its face by keeping its shame. Sometimes that shame is not made of ledger entries, but of people. "I didn't choose who drinks," he said. "I didn't pick the victims. I learned to hide them because you hide a thing you keep. People grow fond of the pretty parts here. They forget what bought it." When he told us that, the room felt colder than the rain had made it. We wanted to ask clever questions. Did anyone ever purposefully leave a man in the rain? But those were the sorts of things Townsbury lawyers and judgmental strangers asked of tragedies. The truth we had to live with was simpler and more repulsive. Sometimes people broke and made selfish choices. Sometimes luck decided for them. We were not a jury. We were neighbors with hands that shook. On the fourth day, something happened that sits with me like a serrated memory.
A small group of transformed creatures, Peter among them, began to coordinate in the way things with new appetites coordinate. They circled the building and watched the seams, tested the doors by pressing faces against the glass. There was a new intelligence in the way they moved. Not cunning, not yet, but an intent. We banged on the windows with pots and shouted in waves of noise to confuse and distract. A couple of them, Mrs. Bell from the third floor and an old retiree who ran the newsstand, came and stood at the perimeter, then turned away like weathered actors in a play they had been in for years. They knew the scripts. They would not storm the doors. They would wait their chance. It was Harry who suggested we offer a trade to get someone out. He claimed he could talk to them because he had a way with words. He wanted to whisper to them like humans whisper to stray dogs. For a while, the internal fights were as dangerous as the outside. A bravery that wanted to test the monsters instead of containing them is a different sort of madness, one I cannot fully forgive nor forget. We divided into watches. Some sat awake and listened to the rain. Others rationed food. Someone, Carla, who had never struck me as a hero, kept track of names. She wrote them on a notepad like a ledger, numbering us like sheep. It felt obscene and necessary. Then came the day the office phone rang, an absurd, tinny sound that made everyone's head snap. We had no reason to expect outside contact. We had cut ourselves from the town rhythms, believing solitude safer. The ringing came from the old line at the reception desk, an act of habit in an era of devices. No one answered because we had decided not to trust voice with its easy lies. When the ringing finally stopped, smoke rose from the alley, and someone in a car had set something small and metallic on the street and lit it. For reasons I still cannot reconcile, small people do irrational things when bored and terrified. It distracted us from the windows long enough for two faces to push themselves against the side door. They were not the grotesques of B-movies. Instead, they hovered in a more intimate horror. Skin that had a faint burnish, hair plastered with a syrup that made it gleam like rope, eyes with a soft, private flame. One of them, Graham, tried to barricade the frame with his shoulder, and his face crumpled as a man who thought himself a hero and found he was a block in a dam.
When the creature outside found the seam and slipped in, it moved with an efficiency that made my stomach coil. We had not counted such eventualities. We were human and slow. In the scuffle, someone cut themselves. Blood is an old language. It can be a warning or an invitation. The new things smelled it with the same fascination we smell a rare perfume. They do not recognize the social rules of courtesy. They know immediate arithmetic, hunger in exchange for motion.
And once a cut opened, and someone licked at it for comfort, an old human gesture, there was an exchange. I don't know whether anything chemical shifted, or whether the act of tasting the town's sweetness unlocks some door inside us. All I know is, the person who licked the wound slumped, and in less than an hour, their nose had a new design, like a ship refitted for a different climate. That night, Harry tried to open the door. He wanted to let out a man who had been sobbing under a desk, an older man who had been locked in a supply closet after he started to hum to himself in the wrong key. Harry's logic was that we owed such a man mercy. He had a temper that turns noble sometimes in the worst way. He and I argued, and it ended in him screaming that I was a coward for wanting to be safe. I thought then that courage and cowardice were two words that hide the same fear. My choice was pragmatic. I'd seen what drinking did. I'd watched Peter empty his mouth of laugh and fill it with hunger. I had seen how people who tasted the black looked at windows like supplicants. Harry wanted to play God. I wanted to keep the town intact. He opened the door. The thing that he released did not run for food so much as for rhythm. It danced when it moved, a terrible choreography of appetite. The man Harry had tried to save turned and smiled at him with a face that used to know him. It was a smile that asked for what Harry loved most. Harry fell apart right there, trying to hug the thing and getting his fingers bitten. I remember the sound he made, less a scream than a breaking, and the way his body folded like old paper. Charlie made the decision I still think about. He moved like someone who had rehearsed an exit, stepping into a room, gathering the eyes that accused, taking the weight of choice on his shoulders. He told us he would go out and lure them away. At first I thought he meant to be a martyr in the old-fashioned way. Later I had to decide whether I would let that be his last act or try to stop him. I failed at both. We argued. Harry spat worst words I have heard a man say to a friend. "You knew," he hissed. He accused Charlie again as if more accusation would make him less guilty. Charlie answered not in words but in gestures, loading a backpack with jars of water and snacks, and the kind of things people carry when they plan not to return. He took 2 jugs of water and a little radio and closed his collar. He kissed Harriet's old photograph and put it in a pocket as if to smuggle her blessing into outer wetness. "Don't," I whispered. I meant all the small things in that word. Don't die, don't go, don't make the ledger uglier. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Hide, Michael. Do what you were told. Keep them safe. This is how the town survives." There was no sermon in it. There was only the resolute thrift of someone who has been paying a debt they did not fully understand. He stepped into the street, and the rain rose around him like an event.
For a moment, I thought I could see him turn the bow itself into a prayer. He moved along the curb, a small, dark figure in a river of black. He whistled, a human tune that reached into the faces at the windows and pulled at something like memory. They came. They were not crude beasts. They were bridges made of the things we loved. Neighbors who knew your kids' names, colleagues who had passed you the sugar once. Their approach was patient and full of the worst mercy. They wanted you to know them as they once had, so you would invite them close. They pressed their faces against the glass and made noises like a lullaby. Charlie walked to meet them. He sat on a bench and unshouldered his rope of water jugs and set them down, like a man setting out a table for guests. The creatures circled like burglars considering a safe. Then one reached and took Charlie's hand with a tenderness that made me physically stagger. Charlie looked at me and gave the smallest shrug, as if to say, "This is the payment. This is the hush we keep, and I am making it for you." "Go back inside," he whispered. His mouth was steady. There was no pleading there, only the mechanical kindness that comes from someone who has spent years apologizing in private. "Make sure they seal the taps. Make sure they'll tell Harriet. Tell her I loved the tarts. I wanted to run into the rain after him and drag him back like a man who refuses burial, but there were reasons not to. A transformed man standing at the door, the bottle in our box, the knowledge that stepping outside might be a one-way theater. I turned away. I taped the windows again with shaking hands. I listened to sounds that had for my entire life been sources of ordinary comfort. Footsteps, a man's footfall returning to the pavement, and watched them become the punctuation of an ending. Later, when the stories are told and retold, people will call what he did noble or foolish. No one will be able to properly weigh those words, because they are both true. He was noble in the way he chose his terms. He was foolish because he chose to believe in an old ledger he did not own. He left us with a quiet that felt like both a benediction and a condemnation. After Charlie, the siege became a series of small wars. We had nights when something clawed at the blinds and left faint, oily prints. We had a day when someone, Graham I think, peeled back the tape in a moment of weak curiosity, and a hand reached into the slit and found a space where there used to be warmth. We sat on chairs and swallowed canned peaches we couldn't taste, and replayed our choices like a litany. The things outside would not pass the law of our doors, but they came close enough to touch. As the days unspooled, the small rhythms of survival became viciously ordinary. You learn how to ration shame. You keep pockets of humor because without them you undeceive into panic. We started writing names on the back of chairs, next to water jugs, so we would know who drank what.
We kept shifts of watch where someone would tap a spoon on a window every hour to remind themselves they were awake. We traded stories about mundane things that had nothing to do with monsters. Football games from years ago, an old teacher with a ridiculous mustache, because those were the pieces of the world we wanted to believe in. There were moments of generosity that cut across the terror. Carla shared a packet of biscuits with a man who shook like a frightened child. He had not yet tasted the rain, and his hands trembled because he had been awake all night ringing the reception desk for the world to remember him. "We are going to be okay," Carla said, the way someone tells a child a half-truth to get them through a thunderstorm. Sometimes words like that are nails. They hold the plank until the tide passes. There were nights when people said the name of someone gone like it might be a spell. We would whisper it into the dark and hope the call did not wake something. I confess now I counted names like a miser counts coins. I ran numbers in the margins of my memory and tried to make arithmetic where there was none. You do what you can when rationality deserts you. The third day had the small cruelty of an old movie. A drop of black gathered on the edge of a cup and hung there like a decision. Someone will always be the weak link. The temptation is close, like the smell of pastry to a starving dog. The bottle that had once sat sealed in the box was taken by someone who had been pushed to the edge, Ronnie's niece, who had been watching the window for days. She told us later that she wanted to believe the rumors were wrong. She wanted to taste normality. She wanted to prove to herself she was braver than fear. She lifted the bottle and put her lips to the rim. We shouted. It didn't matter. The black slicked her mouth and went down. Her face changed in the same small human way the others had changed. Her hand reached toward the window, and she grinned with the wrong kind of smile. It is important to say this plainly. Monsters begin not as men in masks, but as men with small choices. Hope is a human quality that too easily becomes a weapon. She had been one of us. She was one of us. By the fifth day, the office felt like the inside of a watch. The mechanism kept working despite missing parts. People drifted in and out of consciousness. We kept the batteries warm in our pockets like talismans. The world outside had a softness where it once had edges. The air tasted of old coal and of something sweet decaying, and the black rain made everything look like a photograph left in sunlight too long. I will not rehearse each victim in forensic detail. That would be a parade of shame rather than a confession. Instead, I'll say the truth as a flat fact. Enough of us were touched that the balance of the office tilts, and the human economy inside it rewrites itself into something starker. Allies become liabilities. Love becomes a liability. People betray one another in small, trembling ways because the bow reveals appetites we didn't know we had. The moral ledger grows heavy. On the seventh day, there was a light like a new coin.
I woke with the precise sensation of a man who has slept too long and missed a bus. The world was different by a small but decisive amount. The rain had retreated from the glass in sullen dribbles, and the sky had the tentative blue of someone who feels guilty for returning. The black arch was thinning like a bruise that might heal. The atmosphere seemed to exhale. We opened the blinds when Graham said it was Faith, our hands going to the tape like a man undoing bandages. There was a smell of ozone and something else, an apology, or the world's indifferent shrug. The streets were wrecked in the quiet, but not in the way we feared. The puddles dried into stains that could be scrubbed away if one had the stomach for work. Cars had rings of black like bad makeup. The town looked just a little tired, as if it had chewed on a secret and spat it out. At the edge of the square, someone had left a bouquet of flowers near the fountain. They had been bitten by the dark and then returned to a color. The fountain itself coughed a contemplative sputter and resumed the business of water. People came out of their houses carrying sacks and looking at each other like conspirators who had just been pardoned. There were hugs and handshakes and the neat ritual of the return. The town resumed the face it had practiced all its life. We walked on the pavement that had been lacquered the week before. Children appeared on stoops as if by obligation to the calendar, and dogs were let out again with leashes that had not been used in days. The supermarket windows gleamed. The produce looked newly bought. It was a reset designed to be as efficient as any software update. The town said, with its perfect smile, that nothing had happened. But nothing had not happened. I walked the streets like a pilgrim who had been shown the bones under the altar. There were houses with curtains frayed from being shuttered too long. A neighbor's front gate was ajar. A pram leaned in the grass, abandoned. There were names I had learned to whisper at night. Robert, Ronnie's niece, others. And their absence was a kind of punctuation. The town had saved its face by burying the holes in it beneath new paint and newness. But the ledger's margins still bore ink. We swept the sidewalks and painted over black marks that had missed the cleaning crews. We smiled at children. We bought pears and pretended no account had been taken. The bankers would say the town's economy remained sound. The pressures that pay for solar panels and fresh bread were still in place. People would nod to their neighbors and not ask the important questions.
I have replayed the last week 1,000 times, and in all those plays the moral question sits like a pebble. Did we hide to survive, or did we hide to preserve a paradise built on other people's hunger? The answer is an unlovely combination, both at once. We hid because the rain kills us if we test it, and because the town's convenience is an accumulation of decisions that sometimes include the sacrifice of strangers. We hid to keep children from being exposed to something our elders had been burdened with, and we hid to keep our lawns from being paid for in flesh. The two impulses live next to one another, like old married people who cannot sleep apart. Charlie did not come back to me. I saw traces, a scuffed bench where he had sat, his backpack with a jar of water left on the patch of pavement like an offering, but not his face. People told me in the days that followed that when the bough lifts, some of those who change wander away. Sometimes they go to other towns. Sometimes they sit by motorways. The town's older stories told of people who left when leaving meant being unseen by your neighbors. How literal that leaving was, I will not say, because the town's old secrets are a slippery thing. There are those who will call the decision to leave a choice of martyrdom. There are others who will call it cowardice. I call it the only sort of answer a man busied with the ledger can give. He paid in a way we are still counting. When the sun came back in the honest way the sun does, it did not feel like forgiveness. It felt like a reminder. The world was bright and a little mean in its brightness. Snow had been mistaken for kindness before. I knew the glare of paradise better now as a kind of calculation. I watched people laughing in the square and wondered if their smiles were backed by debts I'd rather not tally. I stayed. The reasons are not heroic. I had a lease. I had memories. I had guilt that pinned me to the place like a moth. I stayed because there were stories to tell, and I was too cowardly to turn from them. The town depended on people like me to hold the narrative together. It needs the witness to both maintain the facade and to receive the penances. Now, years later, I wake at the sound of drizzle, and my mouth turns to a taste I never liked before, the memory of sugar and old coal.
When it sprinkles, I hear the town's calendar in my head. 20 years, 7 days, hide, wait, return. The rule is not arbitrary. It is ritualized survival and ethical shoring, and a practice of secrecy that makes day-to-day living possible for many and a moral indictment for others. Sometimes, walking through the square with my errands, I meet eyes with people who look too bright to be innocent. We exchange the small economy of nods, and in those nods there is an agreement. We will not inventory one another's choices. It is the most complicated social contract I have ever been part of.
You learn it the same way you learn a language, by practice, not instruction. My confession comes with a warning. If you ever find yourself in a town that seems too good to be true, notice what the people do with their rain. Ask who owns the water and who does not. Paradise is sensible about its ledgers. It prefers invisible taxes. Why were we always told to hide? Because the black bow is not merely a weather event. It is the accounting book the town keeps closed. When the rain comes, you hide to survive the 7 days of hunger that follow. You also hide because the town's good looks have a price, and because people prefer the convenience of a tidy life to the mess of moral exposure. Hiding is both a literal safeguard and a social smother. It preserves life, and it preserves a market of secrets. I do not pretend to offer redemption, only a record. I am a man who stayed. I am a man who knew men who did not come back. I am a man who will answer when someone asks what rainy days mean in Greyrop. We hide because we must. We hide because we do not want our children to see the ledger. We hide because the town's face requires it. And perhaps worst of all, we hide because hiding is easier than the work of repair. It is an ugly lesson in shared convenience. If you have theories, candor, speculation, something that will let us pretend we are not alone, I want to hear them. Tell me what you think the black bow is, why it chose us, whether we will ever find a better accounting. Drop a comment. If you want more of this, more slow confessions and the kinds of details that make a town into an organism, watch the next story. Stay curious, stay cautious, and remember what we were taught in the dark. When the sky goes black and the rain tastes of promise, hide. It is what keeps your face unmarked in the morning, and what makes a town both lovely and hideous all at once.